We find a machlokes between Tana Kama and Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. The Tana Kama, the first Tana, says Shoyel and V'dorshem be'erches hachag shloshim yom lifnei hachag. Reb Shimon ben Gamliel maintains Shtei Shabbosos. So we have a little bit more than a week till Pesach. So everyone would agree time has come lish'ol v'ledrosh be'hilchos hachag. And today we will be discussing one of the fundamental halachas, which is far beyond Hilchos HaChag. But at least our starting point is Hilchos HaChag. Kuf Tez Zayin Amud Aleph Mesechet Pesachim, we find a Mishnah, Rabban Gamliel Omer, Kol Shelo Yom Shloishet Dvorim Eilo, Lo Yotze Yadecho Vosoi, Pesach, Matza, and Maror, She'anu Oichlum Al Shummo. You need to explain why we eat Pesach, Matzah, and Maror. Otherwise, you weren't Yaitse. So even those that never learned Perek Arvei Pesachim or even Mesechet Pesachim are familiar with this Mishnah because we quote it in the Haggadah Shal Pesach. So Rabbi Gamliel says, if you didn't say these three statements, you didn't explain why we eat Pesach, Matzah, and Maror, you weren't Yaitse. But the Mishnah doesn't explain you weren't Yaitse what? Which mitzvah are you losing out? Two different possibilities. One possibility, which I think is the more reasonable one, is if you didn't explain why do we eat Pesach, why do we eat Matzah, and why do we need to eat Maror, you weren't Yaitse the mitzvah of Sipu Yetzias Mitzrayim. And that's a big chiddush. Which means what is required in this magnificent night is not only to tell the story, it also you need to wove in, you need to explain how do these three great mitzvahs fit into the context, fit into the bigger picture of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. So explaining why we eat Pesach, Matzah, and Maror is part of mitzvah Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. And if you didn't do that, there's a deficiency in the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. That would be one approach. The other approach is, if you didn't explain why we eat Pesach, Matzah, Maror, you weren't Yotzei the mitzvahs of Pesach, Matzah, and Maror. And these mitzvahs, contrary to all the others, if you want to be Yotzei the mitzvah, it is not only about eating, it's about eating and explaining why you're eating. And that's even a greater chiddush. These three mitzvahs are exceptions. No other example like them. But you can be Yotzei these three mitzvahs, and yet you explain why are we eating these Pesach, Matzah, and Maror. Fundamentally, philosophically, it all boils down to the same. There needs to be a connection between Pesach, Matzah, and Maror and the greater context of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim and Zechiras Yetzias Mitzrayim. But nevertheless, there are two different approaches. The Maharsha, in Chidushei Agodos, however, not in the halachas, not in the lamdas, in the pshat, but rather in the Agodah, but the Maharsha clearly writes that the kavanah is you weren't Yotzei Pesach, Matzah, and Maror. That seems to be the understanding of through great Gedolim and later generations. They were contemporaries. The Oroch Lener, Rabbi Yaakov Ettlinger, who was the Rav of Altona, Hamburg, great Kelis in Germany, in a Sefer Bekuri Yaakov, Hilchas Sukkah Tofreish Chofei, and Rabbi Yosef Shol Natanzan, who was the greatest Pesach and the greatest Gadol of that same generation in Galicia, the Shoyel HaMeishev, in his Agodah Divrei Shaul, both connect the Bach with Rabban Gamliel. And it's mashma medevreim that these two have some kesher. Which Bach? There's a gewaltige chiddush that the Bach writes twice, Simen Ches, Hilchas Tzitzis, Tofreish Chofei, Hilchas Sukkah. Even though the Bach refers also to Hilchas Tefillin, but we don't find it in the Bach, only in Simen Ches and Tofreish Chofei. The Bach says, above and beyond the general halach of mitzvahs tzrichas kavana. So there's a machlokes ameroam, Rosh Hashanah Chof Ches, mitzvahs tzrichas kavana, or ein mitzvahs tzrichas kavana. When a person performs a mitzvah, but he has no awareness and no intent to do a mitzvah. One of the striking examples is Hatokeh L'Shir. A person is blowing shofar, but he has no intention of being Mekayim Mitzvah shofar. He likes the music. To him, the shofar is like a trumpet, a saxophone, just a musical instrument. Is he Yoitza or not? And that depends whether Mitzvah Sichas Kavon or not. La'alocha, Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim, Samach Siv Daled, Yesh Oimre Mitzvah Sein Sichas Kavona, Yesh Oimre Mitzvah Sichas Kavona, V'chein Halocha. So we paskin Mitzvah Sichas Kavona. So the Bach explains there are three mitzvahs and only three mitzvahs in which beyond Kavonas Mitzvah, an additional Kavona is required. What is that additional Kavona? When the Torah explains the reason why we are supposed to perform a mitzvah, you need to bear in mind that reason. And that's why the Bach writes, there are three mitzvahs. Which are the three tzitzis? Laman tizkeru v'asisem es kol mitzvoisai. That is one. Tefillin. Laman tiyeh toiras Hashem beficho. And number three is Sukkah. Laman yedu doroisechem ki besukkah sheshavti es b'nei Yisrael b'hoitzi oisam me'eretz Mitzrayim. Because regarding these three mitzvahs, the Pesach clearly explains why you need to perform these mitzvahs and do these acts. So you need kavanah. That's the Bach. So these two gedolim I mentioned just a moment ago tie the Bach into Rabbi Gamliel, and that is the logic of Rabbi Gamliel, Kol Shelo Yom Shlo Yishudevor Meilo. So it seems to be clear from their understanding that Rabbi Gamliel also deals with specific mitzvahs. The Bach talks about tzitzis, tefillin, sukkah. Rabbi Gamliel talks about Pesach, Matza, Maror. Even these gedolim understand it's not exactly the same. Rabbi Gamliel talks about saying, quoting, you use your mouth. The Bach talks about kavanah. They're aware it's not exactly the same. However, what I understand from what they write is, but it is fundamentally the same and similar. There are three mitzvahs which require explanation. Just like the Bach writes, there are three mitzvahs that require kavanah, intent. So this is a fascinating question. In my Sefer Minchas Shemoyedem Chelek Beisem and Yudches, I wrote very strongly, I rejected the pshat, you weren't yoitze the mitzvahs of Pesach, Matza, and Maror, and I leaned very strongly, I wrote confidently, that the kavanah of Rabbi Gamliel is only you weren't yoitze sipu yetzias Mitzrayim. Kachi darka shel Torah. When I went over this sugi again today, I'm less convinced. And I'm not embarrassed to say so. The greatest Ameroim sometimes said, Dvorim shamarti lechem ta'us hoyu biyodi. And when I went over the sugi again today, I'm not so convinced. I definitely see a possibility of two different interpretations. It also became clearer to me that both the Orach Narer and the Shoel HaMeishav didn't really mean to say Rabbi Gamliel and the Bach are one and the same. They were fully aware. Rabbi Gamliel talks about Kol Shalai Omar and the Bach is about Kavanah. But I still think, even comparing the Bach to Rabbi Gamliel proves that their fundamental understanding is, yes, Kol Shalai Omar Shloishet Voromei Lo Yoseh Dechavosai, not in Sipi Yetzias time, but in Pesach Matzah Maror. But I still feel it's more mistaver. Shelo yotzi yedei chavosai b'sipur yetzias Mitzrayim. Rabbi Gamliel talks about Amira, Kol Shalai Omar. L'cha'ira, Amira is associated directly with Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. So in my Sefer, I wrote, Rabbi Gamliel has nothing to do with the Bach. And yes, I say that again, but I think even those Gedolim understood, not that it's the same. So let us address the question, what is the source of Rabbi Gamliel? Where does he take this halacha from? Because, as I mentioned a few moments ago, it's a Gevaldige Chiddush. we find no other precedent, no other example that a person isn't yoytze mitzvah shebemaisa or shebachila, only if he explains why. So there are two different approaches in the Rishonim. Toises on the spot, Kufta Zayin Medalef says, we learn this halacha from the posuk va'amartam zevach Pesach hu Hashem asher posach al botei b'nei Yisrael. So regarding Korban Pesach, the Torah clearly says va'amartam. You need to explain zevach Pesach hu Hashem asher posach ve'iskeshu Matza v'Maror lePesach. That's a hekesh. That's Toisus. Shiboile aleket reish yud ches says, we learn this halacha from Ba'avur Zeh Osu Hashem Li. And Chazal darshan Ba'avur Zeh B'shor sheyesh Matza v'Maror menachom lefanecho. So you need to explain. You need to explain Ba'avur Zeh Osu Hashem Li. And that is why we eat Pesach, Matzah, and Maror. So this is a chiddush. And this chiddush could be interpreted in two different ways. So there is a Malchames, the Ramban, Sefer Malchames and Brochas of Beis, which is the most powerful source to prove the Marshor's understanding. Lo yotzi dechovis Pesach Matzah Maror, the Ramban writes. And the Ran writes something similar in Pesachim Kufta Zayin, but the Ramban is a Masechet Brochas. Where Rambam Gamliel says Lo yotzi dechovosai, he doesn't mean Lo yotzi dechovosai filo b'diavad. It's just a lechat chila. Lo yotzi dechovis mitzvah min hamuvchar. And he doesn't mean to say that you need to eat Pesach Matzah Maror again. No, you were yotze. So it seems to be evident in the Ramban, if there's a Havam and you need to eat Pesach Matzah Maror again, then probably doesn't that make it clear that we're dealing with the mitzvahs of Pesach Matzah and Maror? So previously I argued, no, there would be a Havam and you need to eat again to fulfill the chiyuv of Sipi Yetzias Mitzrayim. Because you need to explain this mitzvahs when you eat Pesach Matzah and Maror. But this is a certain daichik, because if I was already yoytze, what would be the havam in it that I need to eat again? And what was the second, what does it mean? What significance does it have eating again? I was already yoytze the mitzvah. So anyway, two different understandings, interpretations of kol shelo yomar lo yotzi dechavos. And now I want to differentiate between Pesach Matzah Maror and tzitzis, tefillin, and sukkah. And just explain, why doesn't the Bach include 3 other mitzvahs in his list? If we know why we need to eat Pesach Matzah Maror and we need to explain it, why don't we need to have kavanah? Though there's room to argue, the Bach doesn't need to add 3 other mitzvahs, because if you need to explain, that is far beyond kavanah. You need to say, not only to be mechaven. But still, what I want to argue today is, the Bach doesn't really mean to say that whenever we know the tam of a mitzvah, you need to have kavanah. So the Pri Megadim says there is another mitzvah in which, according to the Bach, you need to have kavanah, and otherwise you are not yoytze. And what is that other mitzvah? The mitzvah of Pidyon Haben. So the Pri Megadim Siman Ches Mishbet Seizov Sif Koten Zayin. So the Posuk in Parshas Boy regarding Pidyon Haben, V'chol b'choyer odom bevonecho tivdevahoyu ki yesholchu binchu mocho laim mazois v'yomar tu elev b'choy zekiad hoitziyonu Hashem mimitzrayim. So the Pasuk clearly says, if your child will ask, why do you do Pidyon Haben? B'choy zekiad hoitziyonu Hashem mimitzrayim. So this mitzvah as well is mefurish b'Torah. According to the Mach, you need to have kavanah. If the Pri Megadim is right, we have a huge, huge problem. So Pidyon Haben is not a very common mitzvah, but still we all participated in Pidyon Haben many times. And I never heard a Rav or a Kohen explaining to the father, you need to bear in mind, when you give me those 5 shkolim, it's a Zecher Yetzias Mitzrayim. Nobody does it. And most people aren't even aware of this posuk, even though they say it every day in the morning. So there's a machlekes Pri Megadim and B'Kuri Yankov. Is this additional kavanah of the Bach ma'akev b'diavad, or it's only lechatchila? Prima Godem says it's lechatchila. The Mishnah Berurah quotes him, agrees with him in Simach Chofei. Bekuri Yankiv Tov Reish Chofei that I quoted before says maybe it's makivim b'di'evid. So the Prima Godem l'shitosoi, the problem is not that terrible. It's just a lechatchila. But if we put the Bekuri Yankiv on top of the Prima Godem says by Pidin Ben you also need to have kavona, and the Bekuri Yankiv says it's ma'akiv even b'di'evid, then we have a real problem. And we need to tell 100,000 people that did Pidyon Ben, you weren't Yoitzi even b'di'evid. You need to do it again. Because the Prima Godem says you need to have kavana. According to the Bekuri Yankiv, it's ma'akev even b'di'evid. So we'll need to deal with a really godless shaila. If you weren't Yoitzi the mitzvah of Pidyon Ben, but after all, is it like kinyonim? After all, you paid, you gave the kohen. So maybe kavon is not ma'akev for another reason, because it's like a transaction. So let me explain to you my opinion. One does not need to have kavona for tama mitzvahs at all. Neither those that are mefurish b'Torah, neither those that are not mefurish b'Torah. Neither Pesach nor Matza nor Maror, and not Pidyon haben. We need to differentiate between Tamei HaMitzvahs and Tachlis HaMitzvahs, between a reason and a goal, an objective. So there are various different mitzvahs, and Pidyon Ben is a good example of one, in which, yes, the Torah teaches us what is the reason of the mitzvah. That does not require a kavanah. But when the Torah says laman, that is the goal, that is the objective. That is where the mitzvah needs to take us and what we need to achieve by performing this mitzvah. And that is only by tzitzis, when the Torah says, Leman tizkeru, Leman tiye Torah Hashem beficha, Leman yedu dorosechem ki besukkos hashafti es b'nei Yisrael, v'yitziosem mieretz Mitzrayim. But Pidyon Ben, the Pesach merely says, V'hoyu ki yishalchu bin cholem ar ma'azois. If your child asks, we want you to know the answer. But if he doesn't ask, you don't need to say, and you don't even need kavanah. Tam and tachlis are two different definitions, two different concepts. Kachnel and yizdaiti. And because I know that what I say is a big chiddush, and I don't know whether anybody said it before me, I want to prove it. So the Bach says, by tzitzis you need to have kavanah, because the Pesach says, Leman tiskuru v'asisem es kol mitzvosai. That isn't the Parsha of Tzitzis, Parshas Shalach. That's Posuk Mem. But in Posuk Lamed Tet, the Torah already explains why do we need perform this mitzvah. V'hoyo lachem letzitzis ureisam oiso yezachartem es kol mitzvahs Hashem v'asisam oisam. So why does the Bach skip Posuk Lamed Tes and quote Posuk Mem and not the Posuk that's before? Because in that posuk the Torah doesn't say leman, and that is why the Bach bases his chiddush on posuk mem, not posuk lametes. Leman tizkeru v'asisem es kol mitzvosai. That is my opinion. So I still have 3 questions. Parshas Re'ei in Mishnah Torah. Lo yisaychel olav chometz shivis yom metochel olav matzas laman tizkeres yom tzeis chom yeretz Mitzrayim kol yomei chayecha. So the Pesach once again says, Leman tizkeres yom tzeis chom yeretz Mitzrayim. What is the difference between Leman tizkeru, vasisem es kol mitzvosai, Leman tizkeres yom tzeis chom yeretz Mitzrayim? My answer is a very simple one. Yes, this is an objective. But this posuk is not a mitzvah. Shivas Yomim Toichel Olav Matzos is not a mitzvah to say. The mitzvah of matzah is only Leil Rishon, only the first night, bed of Toichel Matzos. This posuk is actually a lo ta'aseh. Sheval ta'aseh not kum v'aseh. Lo yisoichel olav chometz, Shivas Yomim Toichel Olav Matzos, leman tizkor. This is not mitzvah's matzah. And by Allah, there never is a concept of kavanah. Sheval ta'aseh, it's not shayach kavanah. When exactly do you need to have this kavanah? The entire concept of kavanah by mitzvahs, whether we're dealing with mitzvah sichas kavanah or we're dealing with a special kavanah of the Bach, is only by mitzvahs to say, and that is why this posuk isn't relevant. Laman yarichu yamecha. Everybody understands this is different. Laman yarichu yamecha is not something you need to bear in mind. To the contrary, havu kavodah mamisham shemesalav shalol manas lakaber pras. We don't want someone to be makayim because he wants to live long. It is a promise that HaKadosh Baruch Hu promises. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I want you to have a long and wonderful life. So please do this mitzvah. But I don't want you to bear in mind that this is the reason you're doing this mitzvah. So what still bothers me? A pasuk dealing with the mitzvah of Maser Sheni b'Yerushalayim. And this once again takes us to Parshas Re'eh in Mishnah Torah. So as I said, I'm just, it's an embarrassment, I'm embarrassed to say, but the exact lashon of Psukei Torah, I always prefer reading out of Kesav. So, here we are. So there's a pasuk dealing with the mitzvah of Achilas Maser Sheni. So you all know what is the din of Maser Sheni. You need to bring Maser Sheni to Yerushalayim and eat Maser Sheni in Yerushalayim. Leman tilmad liyira es Hashem Elokecha kol hayamim. Aseh ta'aser es kol tvo zaracha. ואוכלתו לפני השם אלוקיך במקום מה שיבחר לשכן שמי שם, מעשה דגונך, למען תלמד לירוץ השם אלוקיך כל הימים. So this is a mitzvah of Achilas Maser Sheni בירושלים, למען תלמד לירא es Hashem אלוקיך. So my first response would be, yes, this is similar to tzitzis, tefillin, and sukkah. So why doesn't the Bach write it? For a very simple reason. The Bach is a commentator on the Torah. Unlike the Rambam in his Mishnah Torah paskind, codified all Taryag mitzvahs shebet-Torah. Not only the ones that are noheg bizman hazeh, the entirety of Torah, but the Torah had a different approach. And Arba'a Turim, Morechaim, Yerodei, Even Ezer, Choshemesh, but only mitzvahs anoheg bizman hazeh. So we do not find the mitzvah of Achilas Maser Sheni b'Yerushalayim in the Torah because it's not noyeg b'zman hazeh. Today we are poida Maser Sheni on money, and b'shas ha'bi'u we destroy the money. So we don't have the mitzvah of Pidyon Maser Sheni in the Torah, of Achilas Maser Sheni b'Yerushalayim. So it's also not in the Bach. But Korav b'Yameinu, when Mashiach will come, the Rambam will sit back and smile and say, Misha Torach b'Erev Shabbos Yerchel b'Shabbos. I prepared whatever is needed 1,000 years ago. But the Torah will need to scramble. What do I do now? There are so many new halachas. It'll probably take the Torah 2 or 3 months to include all the other mitzvahs. Binyam Beis Abchira, Maseh HaKarbonos, Tamidin V'Mesofin, all the other halachas. And then Oiz V'Hoda will come out with Hatur HaChadash V'Mechudash HaMefurash V'Mevu'ar. So we'll have the new Torah. And the Bach will also need to update his Perish. So maybe then, in the future Bach, the Bach will say there are 4 mitzvahs in which you need to have kavanah when you perform the mitzvah. Tzitzis, Tefillin, Sukkah, and Achilas Maser Sheni b'Yerushalayim. But then I decided, no, this is a mistake. Maser Sheni is different. And that is based on Tosfos and Bava Basra Daf Chof Aleph. A unique interpretation of the Pusik. Tosfos explains Bava Basra Chof Aleph. How does Achilas Maser Sheni b'Yerushalayim bring a person to Yiras Shamayim? Tosfos has a fascinating explanation. Maser Sheni, a person is mafresh on a steady basis throughout the entire year. When you're mafresh, every time you're mafresh Tumas Maisis, it's Trumas Maisa, Maser Ish, and Maser Sheni. But you can't eat Maser Sheni only Yerushalayim. So you are poida Maser Sheni with money. And then you accumulate a lot of money. Might be thousands of dollars. Maybe even more. And when you come to Yerushalayim, You don't bring a huge wagon of fruit because the fruit will rot and the vegetables will rot throughout the year. So you bring money. And you cannot spend that money in Yerushalayim only on food and drinks. You cannot pay transportation with most Matza Sheni. You can't buy a new Streimer in Yerushalayim, only food. So Matza Sheni necessitates people to sit in Yerushalayim for a lengthy period of time till they finish all their Matza Sheni money. So to be with the Mekayim, the Mitzvah Yeror Kol Zechuchi, you could come for one day, bling Oiles Riyah, and go back home. But Matza Sheni requires you sit a while in Yerushalayim, whether it's a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, maybe a month, and then maybe more. And what do people do in Yerushalayim? They go to the Beis HaMikdash, to the Azorah, to observe the Koyanim. And they see Maleches HaKodesh. They see the Koyanim and the Leviim performing their mitzvahs in Beis HaMikdash, B'Kedusha V'Tahara, Af hu noisen el libo yira shamayim v'la'asog b'Torah. That is what Tosfos explains. And according to Tosfos, it is very clear. Unlike tzitzis, tefillin, and sukkah, in which the kavanah is directly associated with the actual performance of the mitzvah. You wear tzitzis and you look at your tzitzis and you remember the mitzvahs. You have tefillin on your head, on your arm, and that brings Yiras Shamayim, that brings Lamanti Yatolis Hashem Befichu. You look at the schach, why am I sitting in the sukkah? You remember Anani Yakovid. But Yiras Shamayim doesn't depend on the actual eating of Matza Sheni. Matza Sheni is Achilas Mitzvah. It's no different than Achilas Matzah, Achilas Maror, Achilas Korban Pesach, Achilas Kotshim Kalam, Achilas Kodshe Kudashim Lekoyanim. Laman Tilmed Liyiro is the experience of spending time in Yerushalayim. And that is why there's no need for kavanah. And I say the same, exactly the same svara regarding what might be another question and another kasha, and that is the mitzvah of hakel in Mishnah Torah. Hakel is wama noshim v'anoshim v'ata v'ge'echo asher b'shecho leman yishma'u uleman yilmedu v'yoro es Hashem Elokechem v'shomru l'aseh is called divrei HaTorah azois. So here we also find leman yishma'u uleman yilmedu. So do we need kavanah? Minchas Shal Torah, the new edition. I don't remember which siman, but I think it's in Parshas Vayelech and Mishnah Torah. There's a lengthy discussion about mitzvah hakel. Is the mitzvah only on the melech, the king? He needs to bring the people together. Or is the mitzvah also on the individuals that come? So I have a lengthy discussion about this question. If the melech needs to bring the people together, I would assume the mitzvah is also upon the people to come together and to converge. But anyway, I think this is similar to Matza Sheni in Yerushalayim. The reason that Torah asks us all to come and experience this togetherness of multitudes and looking at Melech Yisrael sitting on a huge stage and reading Torah and seeing his submission and his dveikus and his anava and the powerful king that can do whatever he wants, and he's reading out of a Sefer Torah. Onoichi Hashem Elokecho Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. That is Leman Yishmau Uleman Yilmedu. So it is the experience. The mitzvah is hakel. So when he sends out emails, when he blows the shofar, when does he need to have in mind Leman Yishmau Uleman Yilmedu? So I think this is similar to Leman Tilmad Liyiros Hashem Elokecho. It's not a certain act which necessitates when you put on tzitzis, when you sit in the sukkah, when you wear tefillin, you need to have in mind Tamei HaMitzvah. I think this is different. This is an indirect result of the mitzvah of hakel. So once again, the Bach is relevant only to 3 mitzvahs, and those are the 3 that the Bach explains, tzitzis, tefillin, and sukkah. Rabban Gamliel is a different concept. He's talking about Amira. And how do we know? Either V'amartam Pesach ul Hashem or Ba'av ul Zeh. And there are 2 legitimate interpretations of Rabban Gamliel. Does he mean the mitzvah of Sipi Yetzias Mitzrayim? And the Chiddush is, in the context of Sipi Yetzias Mitzrayim, it is required not only to tell the story, but also to explain how Pesach Matza Maror fit in to the narrative, to the story Mitzias Mitzrayim, or maybe he means you cannot be Yotze the mitzvahs of Pesach, Matza, and Maror unless you explain why we eat Pesach, Matza, and Maror. But nevertheless, both the Ramban and the Ran explain it as only Elechatchila, and it's not Ma'akev B'di'evet. So you need to explain. Ba'avur zeh osu Hashem li. There's a thought I speak about every year, I think. There's one posuk in Agodah Pesach. It's like a refrain. We quote this posuk 4 times during the Seder. Which is that posuk? Nobody guesses, nobody remembers, unless you heard it from me in previous years. Ba'avur zeh osu Hashem li b'tzeisi mitzrayim. We first quote this posuk to the Rasha when he says Mo avodah zois lechem. And then we quote the same pasuk to the She'eni Yadei Alishul, the simpleton. He has no questions. And in the Hemshech of the Agoda, B'chol dor v'dor cha'avod u'meres atzam kilo, Hu yotzeh b'mitzrayim shelem ba'avod zeh osu Hashem li. And the dogesh, the emphasis is on li, osu Hashem li. Yochel meresh chodesh talmid loima ba'avod zeh b'shor sheyesh Matza v'Maror menachem lefonach. And if we quote this pasuk 4 times, that obviously conveys a very important and central message. What is that message? There are 2 different interpretations, 2 different pshotim. Ba'avur zeh osu Hashem li. Rabbeinu Sadi go and says it's like a pasuk misuras. It is as if the pasuk says zeh ba'avur, not ba'avur zeh. We point at the Pesach Matzah Maror and we explain, why do we need to eat this? Like Rabbi Gamliel says, to remember various different stages of Yetzias Mitzrayim. Rashi is the great Pashtan. The pasuk doesn't say zeh ba'avur, but rather ba'avur zeh. Kosev Rashi ba'avur zeh osu Hashem li kedei she'akayem mitzvotav. We were redeemed from Mitzrayim to take upon ourselves Zor Malchus Shemayim and to perform mitzvahs. So when the Rasha doesn't like the mitzvahs and he says, Mo avodah zois lechem. And the Yerushalmi in Psuchim Samaches has a more blunt and harsh and ugly question that the Rasha asks. Ma haTorah hazeh shetem matrichim aleinu b'kol shana v'shana. What is all this about? What is this terche yesera? And we respond, you don't like these mitzvahs? They're a burden on you. It's what Yetzias Mitzrayim is all about. Ba'avur zeh osu Hashem li kedei she'akayem et mitzvotav. Ilu haya sham lo haya nigal. Kodesh Baruch Hu took us out of Mitzrayim not so that we shall be a free people. Yes, we were freed from bondage. We need to be free from Basav Adam. But we want to take upon ourselves Or Malchus Shemayim. Ba'avur zeh osu Hashem li kedei she'akayem et mitzvotav. And if you complain about these mitzvahs, you're not part of it. And then comes the She'eni Yadei Alishul. We made every effort to provoke him, to ask. Oikrem es hashulchan machalkin kaloyes v'agoyzim, to no avail. We say, our sweet child, obviously, you're not going to be a great philosopher because we tried. You have no questions to ask. So you can't ask. But could you eat? So please, eat Pesach, eat Matzah, eat Maror, and that is more important. Whether you ask or not, we tried. Nish gefährlich. Please eat. Because it's all about these mitzvahs. Pesach zusha ona oichle, Matzah, Maror, ba'avur zeh, kedei she'akayem et mitzvotav. And that is why it's important. B'chol dor v'dor, chayav odam nisas v'kelo, hu yotzeh b'mitzrayim. Why does it need to be personal and not enough to remember? Our forefathers know, because Kabbalah Sol Malchus Shemayim is personal. And the performance of mitzvahs is your mitzvahs. It's about you. It is about you performing the mitzvahs, and therefore it is important that you feel as if you are the one. And that is why Chazal explain, Sibi Yetzias Mitzrayim is not Merish Chodesh. It is connected with the mitzvahs. B'shor sheyesh Matza v'Maror menachem lefonach Hashem ba'avur osu Hashem li kedei she'akayem et mitzvotav. So Yetzias remembering Yetzias Mitzrayim and telling the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim is about Avdus more than Cherus. Cherus Mabos Adam. Ki li b'nei Yisrael avodehem asher hoitzesi oisam me'eretz Mitzrayim. So Gedolei Chasidus explained the great Tanoim. Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkonos and Rabbi Shua, Rabbi Kiva, Rabbi Tarf, and Rabbi Rosa ben Azariah were sitting Kol Yisrael Layla Shabo Talmideihem. V'amru Rabbi Seinu Agi Azman Kriyas Shema. They went on and on until all the Talmidim felt, and it burst forth from their heart, Rabbi Seinu, time has come to be Makabel Ol Malchus Shamayim. And they knew we achieved our goal. Ba'avur zeh oso Hashem li b'tzeisi miMitzrayim. So there's a Chassidish tale about the tzaddik of Berditch of the Kedushas Levi, and as we all know, he was called Sanegoran Shel Yisrael, and he loved every Jew, even the simpletons, the poshet ha'amei oretz. And the story goes that before he went home to his magnificent Seder, his holy Seder, he used to stand behind the doors of the simple amei oretz, simple people in Berditch, and listen, how is their Seder coming along? And once he stand behind the door of a very simple Amma Oretz, a simple Jew. And he hears the father telling his children. Many, many years ago I learned in Cheder. I don't even remember what it was about, but I remember that Rebbe said, Tzorech laharech be'echod. So when you say echod, you need to stretch it out. Laharech be'echod. And the father tells his kids, in the coming paragraph that we're starting to read now, I see we have 4 echods, 4 times echod. So let's do the halacha tzorach laharech be'echod, and father together with all his children. Keneged arba obonim divrei Torah. And then he goes, echad chacham, echad rosha, echad tam. And the tzaddik lifts his eyes to the heavens and he says, Rabbeinu Shalom, v'yasta nachazana kindalach. Do you have such beautiful kindalach anywhere in the world? Are there anyone like them out there? The greatest Tanoim, it took till the morning till the Talmidim felt Higias Man Kriya Shema, this simple Jew. He barely started a Seder, and he already is Marich Be'echod. And then the Tzaddik said, Higias Man Kriya Shema Shel Shacharis. Shacharis is Rosh HaTevis, Chocham Rosh HaTam, She'einoi Yoideya. Yes, we invite them all to the Seder table. We want them all around the table. We hope and pray that by the end of the night, not only the Chocham, not only the Tam, even the Sheni Yadei Elishal, and even the Rasha, Halavai, they should all say, Rabbi Seinu, Higia Zaman, Kriya Shema. That's our tefillah, that's our hope. And that's my brucha to all of you. In this magnificent night, in these magnificent days of Chag HaMatzos, Chag HaCherus, Chag HaEmunah, all our children should say, together with us, Higia Zman Kriya Shema. And we should all together be Makabel Ol Malchus Shamayim. Have a kusha and freilichen, beautiful